Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII's most successful wife and queen. Henry VIII is most infamously known for his 6 wives, but his turmoil in his love life led to disastrous consequences for the women who married the king. After Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn, it's fair to say that things went very downhill for him due to him having 4 marriages in a short amount of time. Anne of Cleves was the 4th wife to the notorious Tudor Monarch, and she managed to escape her marriage to the king with her head and a rather substantial sum of riches. In some regards, despite her marriage to the king being short-lived, unhappy and dire, she can be considered to have been Henry VIII's most successful wife or queen. Following the death of Henry VIII's 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, the quest was on to find the English monarch a new wife. This was done shortly after Jane's death following childbirth complications. Thomas Cromwell was tasked with helping Henry find his next wife, and the scandal around his suggestion for Henry to marry one of the daughters of the Duke of Cleves led Cromwell, one of the king's closest advisers and friends, to lose his head. Henry entered negotiations with the German family, and he dispatched his royal painter, Hans Holbein, to go and paint realistic portraits of the 2 daughters, Anne of Cleves and Amalia of Cleves. Anne was older, and Holbein was told not to embellish his paintings and to paint them as lifelike as possible, so the king could then look at the paintings and choose his next wife. When Holbein returned, Henry looked at the images and he chose Anne as his next wife, and subsequent negotiations took place to organise the marriage of King Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves. On the 27th of December 1539, Princess Anne von Jülich-Kleeberg arrived on English soil and landed at Deal in Kent to prepare for her marriage. Thomas Cromwell had sought after Anne to help Henry forge a European alliance in the wake of his 2 greatest rivals, King Francis I and also the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who both had signed a treaty. As the Pope had also excommunicated him, it seemed likely that an invasion of England would come, but Cromwell thought an alliance between England and Germany would be a good thing, and Cromwell championed this alliance heavily. When Henry relented, Cromwell brokered the marriage. On New Year's Eve 1539, Anne arrived at Rochester Castle in Kent. Henry, eager to meet his new wife, then went to visit her in disguise. At the time, it was a chivalric tradition to do this, but Anne did not understand what was going on, and she was not familiar with this custom. When Henry VIII advanced towards Anne, she displayed no sign of enthusiasm, engagement, or anything towards Henry, and she had little interest in the overweight monarch. It's considered that she did not even know who he was, and at the time her English was rather poor, so it was interpreted by Henry that she ignored him. This did not help the king's mood, and his first meeting showed that the marriage was doomed from the start. Immediately, Henry was put off by Anne of Cleves, and he declared to Cromwell, "I like her not, I like her not," of which Cromwell began to fear. History has portrayed Anne of Cleves as an ugly woman, or certainly the least beautiful of Henry's queens. However, this is probably not the case. It's believed she was not as bad-looking as was thought. Anne was tall and broad, and she did have a large nose, which has been disguised by Holbein's paintings. But also, she had a number of scars from a bout of smallpox, which she had suffered with. However, she was nowhere near as awful as history has played her. She's been labelled as a horse and other derogatory things, but although she may not have been of great beauty, it's considered that her looks were far from terrible. Henry at the time, let's face it, was hugely overweight, and the ulcer in his leg was so bad that it caused him to be less mobile, and in fact it was known to have smelt very bad. With this, it's clear to see who the one who was disgusting really was. But after this first meeting, there was no way back for Henry and Anne. He had already signed the agreement with the Duke of Cleves and was bound to honour the marriage. He did try a number of times to get a loophole to get him out of the marriage, asking a number of his ministers to try and find him one, but it was impossible. He told Cromwell, in a blind fit of rage, "Is there none other remedy, but that I must needs against my will put my neck in the yoke?" referring that he saw the marriage of him and Anne almost as a death sentence. Because there was no way out, on the 6th of January 1540, Henry was forced to go ahead with the marriage. However, Henry knew that he needed to consummate the marriage for it to be seen as valid in the eyes of the law, but he told Cromwell the next day in their first evening together as husband and wife that Anne repelled him. Because of this, he did not sleep with his new queen, and he stated that she had evil smells about her, and he made derogatory comments about her body. Henry claimed she had looseness of breast, which was a euphemistic term to state that she was not a virgin, which would, if she wasn't giving Henry what he wanted, a way out of the marriage. He continued to state that her looks did nothing for him, and he said he left her a good maid as I found her, meaning he couldn't perform his duty. The lack of action the king saw in the bedroom with Anne could have been put down to his terrible physical condition, but he of course blamed Anne for this. Anne was not as charming as some of Henry's other wives, and she was not accustomed to English court fashion or rules. She was not a skilled dancer, neither did she know many languages. Instead, she was good at needlework or domestic chores. The fact she lacked this courtly skill meant she suffered at court because of this. The key negotiator for the marriage at the time, Cromwell, had been arrested, as the marriage was a disaster, but he even agreed to help the king annul his marriage to Anne whilst in prison. It was discovered that her marriage could possibly be invalid, as information came to the forefront that she had previously been betrothed to Francis, the Duke of Lorraine. Because of this, Anne was forced to move her court to Richmond Palace, and Henry had found the loophole out of the marriage. But why can Anne of Cleves be regarded as Henry VIII's most successful wife? After just 6 months of marriage, their marriage was annulled, and in the settlement there was a huge amount of riches and wealth gained from the English king. Anne was rewarded greatly, and she was formally recognised as the king's sister, a title which she kept. She was also rewarded with Hever Castle, the former childhood home of Anne Boleyn, which was a prominent Tudor estate. She was also given Bletchley Palace and Richmond Palace. Along with this, she gained a huge annual income from Henry, and the king agreed that she could keep all her other royal jewels, furs, gold and silverware, and also goods gained from the marriage. This itself was seen as shocking, as the king freely parted with a huge sum of wealth in the form of goods. Anne was regarded, except for Henry's daughters and future queens, as the most senior and powerful woman in England following the annulment, as the proclamation that she was the king's sister. Anne for the rest of her life stayed on the fringes of English court, and she maintained a positive friendship with King Henry VIII. He went to visit her a number of times while she stayed at Hever Castle, and whilst here she stayed as if she was a queen. She had lavish banquets, beautiful tapestries and great comfort whilst at Hever. With this and the palace at Richmond, it's easy to consider that she benefited greatly from her divorce from Henry, and that the king's hand was forced to pay out to settle the divorce. Anne also outlived the rest of Henry's wives, but after the king's death she suffered under the reign of his successor, Edward VI. Edward saw Anne as a stain on resources, and he saw no reason for her to remain at court. Anne lost 2 of her manors, but she still made Hever Castle her own royal court, and Hever remained her central base. She held many different parties here, and also met with diplomats and other European visitors. The future Queen Elizabeth I also visited Anne at Hever, and she enjoyed her time as a guest there. She remained positive with both Elizabeth and Princess Mary, and Anne was allowed a role in the coronation of Mary I when she became queen. She was there with Princess Elizabeth in an open-top carriage, and when Mary walked into Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth and Anne of Cleves were there behind her. There were rumours that Anne and Elizabeth, both Protestants, were planning to overthrow the Catholic Mary, but Anne left court and spent the rest of her life at Hever Castle. She passed away on the 16th of July 1557 following a short illness, and she was given a full royal funeral which took place at Westminster Abbey, where she was also buried. With this, it's interesting to consider that Anne was the most successful of Henry VIII's wives, and she has the right to be regarded as this. Following her divorce, she was given huge riches, allowed to keep her royal jewels and property, and was given residences in beautiful castles and palaces. She was allowed to continue to live the Queen's life despite being referred to as the King's sister. She maintained a prominent position in England at the time, and also was regarded as well thought of by Elizabeth I and also Mary I. She lived a luxurious and independent life after the end of her marriage, and it was regarded as happy too. It's clear also that her and the King maintained an amicable and positive relationship after the end of their marriage, and unlike two of Henry's wives, she also managed to keep her head. With this, Anne of Cleves must be considered the most successful, but also lucky wife of Henry VIII. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.